Can everybody hear okay? Okay, good. Home, Danny. Yakshim. Thank you for getting up so early. Good morning, everybody. Now, I have to show you all something. The Japanese gardeners are here today. And I should cancel the class, if you can see them out there on the ladder. I should cancel the class and let you just watch them, because while we're sitting in here, that's the real Zen out there. He's got the little scissor in his hand. You can hear it, maybe. You hear the clip, clip? And he's doing the tree just to get the right shape with a little scissor in his hand. And you see, they're the ones really responsible for the garden out there to stay alive. I just take credit for it the rest of the year. And everyone says, oh, you're a real Zen priest. You have such a beautiful garden. You take care of it. And I sometimes say, oh, yes, thank you. But what I really should say is, no, I don't do anything except watch these guys. See how patiently? Just to get up on that ladder he's standing on, which is a Japanese triangular ladder, you have to, I think, have to have the real Zen mind, you know. You're never going to get me up on that ladder. Anyway, good to see you. We have our tuber player, Sekishi, who's here. You'll find out what that's all about later. Who is going to be delivering a lovely talk today on, as I understand, the 4 seals and building a house. Is that correct? Okay, very good. And Doyu, who is here. Shokai, Onkai as always. Shingen is always here unless there's some impossibility. Work, family is one of the few times. And Kyonin, lovely. One of Kyonin's students from Mexico came to join Treeleaf this week. He's got the group, and it's Mexico City. You have your group? Yeah. Okay. So if we're all in Mexico City, we all go sit with Kyonin. Okay? All right. Did I forget anything? All right. Well, I'm here. If you've been here before, let me straighten these robes up. If you've been here before, you know what to do. And if it's your first time, just follow along. Let's go.
마가 한야 하나미다 신교 간지사이보사츠교진 한야 하나미다 지쇼 겐도 가이구도 이사이크 야크샤리 시시키후 이구구후 이시키시키 소쿠제구구 소쿠제 시키주 소교 시키야구구 묘제 샤리 시제 쇼호구 소후 쇼후 메츠구 후요후 소후 겐제 고구 주무 시키무유 소교 시키무 겐비비제 신니무 시키쇼고미 소쿠호무 겐카이나이시무 시키카이무무묘 야크무무묘 인나이시무로시 야크무 로시인무 구슈메츠도무지야구무도쿠이무 쇼도고보다이사다이 한야하라미다 고신무게게무 게게고무구구원리사이덴토무 소구교네 한산세쇼 무츠에 한야하라미다 고도구와노쿠다라산 야쿠산 고다이 고지 한야하라미다 제다이 진주 제다이 묘슈 제무요슈 제무도도슈 노요이사이구 신지츠부 고고세츠 한야하라미다슈 세츠슈 와츠 야데 야데 하라 야데 하라소 야데 모이소와가 한야신교 The identity of relative and absolute. The mind of the great sage of India is intimately conveyed west and east, while human faculties are both wise and dull in the way there are no northern or southern ancestors. The subtle source shines clear in the light, the branching streams flow in the dark. To be attached to things is primordial illusion. To encounter the absolute is not yet enlightenment. All spheres, every sense and field, intermingle even as they shine alone, interacting even as they merge, yet keeping their places in expressions of their own. Sights differ primarily in shape and character, and sounds in harsh or soothing tones. The dark makes the words one, the brightness distinguishes good and bad phrases. The four elements return to their true nature as a child turns to its mother. Fire is hot, water is wet, wind moves, and the earth is dense. Eye and form, ear and sound, nose and smell, tongue and taste, the sweet and sour, each independent of the other, like leaves that come from the same root. And though leaves and root must go back to the source, both roots and leaves have their own uses. Light is also darkness, but do not think of it as darkness. Darkness is light. do not see it as light. Light and darkness are not one, not two, like the foot before and the foot behind in walking. Each thing has its own being, which is no different from its place and function. The relative fits the absolute as a box and its lid. The absolute meets the relative, like two arrow points that touch in midair. Hearing this, simply perceive what is, make no criterion. If you do not see the way, you do not see it even as you walk upon it. Walking forward in the way, you draw no nearer, progress no further. One who fails to see this truth is mountains and rivers away. Listen, those who would perceive this subtle matter. Live well your time by night and day. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, reality existing right here now. In reciting the heart of the perfection of Red Wisdom Sutra and the identity of relative and absolute, we dedicate our sincere efforts to Shakyamuni Buddha, Honor One, the historical Buddha and teacher, and to those ancestral teachers, Eihei Dogen Honor One, Soji Keizen Honor One, all successive Honor Ones up until Suigaku Renpo Honor One, and Budo Wafu Honor One, and to all other Honor Ones throughout history, male and female Honor Ones whose names have been forgotten or left unsaid. We also dedicate these efforts to the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, to all awakened ones and teachers in all places and times. We especially seek tranquility and well-being for all creatures now suffering or ill in health. May they be serene to all the ills. May their lives be at peace and wisdom pervade the darkness of ignorance. We dedicate our hopes and aspirations to all victims of war and violence and natural events, to the injured and to all families touched by these tragedies, to the healing of hatred in all countries and among all peoples, to the wisdom and compassion of our world leaders, to the peace of the world and harmony of all beings. Thus let the harmful effects of words, thoughts, and actions be dispelled, and compassion bloom in perpetual spring. May we all realize and live the enlightened way together. All Buddhas throughout space and time. All Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, Maham, Prashnam, Paramita.
Can everyone still hear? Zazen? You'd like to put the fan. Excuse me. you like to turn your cheese? Or?
It's okay.
Mhm. Zazen? Really, you should all be watching these gardeners outside. As we're sitting, all we can hear is snip, 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 snip. have a long inhale. a talk by the Reverend Sekishi, followed by Zazen. But please take a couple of minutes to stretch, and we have some tea over here. If any of you would like some tea, we have some tea over here. Thank you. Please make yourself comfortable. You can sit Zazen during Sekishi's talk or just relax. We had actually Sekishi, Reverend Sekishi, the Reverend Sekishi, and I had some talk about that. And Sekishi said, I'm no reverend. And he hasn't had Dharma transmission yet, but he's ordained. So I had to look this up. And actually, these terms, you know, they don't really apply to Buddhism. They're from Christianity when they tried to translate these things. So they don't apply to the Buddhist institution at all to say reverend or father. So all we could do is look for an example. So we found in the Catholic and the Lutheran Church that if you're a novice, a novitiate in the seminary, you're actually the Reverend Novitiate Sekishi, right? All right.
And this is what happens when you, bring something up to Jundo.
Get a little closer to the microphone if you would. You're a little fuzzy there. Okay. We want to enjoy. I'm going to recite the verse to open the sutras now. Let me just mention that Sekishi, welcome to the 21st century. You may have noticed for many years, Sekishi who's by the way an internet and computer expert from Virginia Tech. We learned today. Had no internet connection. He was still using his dial-up modem, basically. And now you're hooked up to fiber optics. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. All right. So we're going to enjoy that today. All right. Let me do the honors. The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is always encountered, yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning. The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is always encountered, yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning. The Dharma, incomparably profound, is always encountered, yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
Thank you, Jundo. So can everybody hear me? Okay. I hooked up a new microphone, and I realized that might not have been a good idea because we knew that the old microphone at least worked. So, hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see you. I haven't given very many talks, so, cut me some slack, use a big grain of salt, all that stuff. So as Jundo mentioned, I'm hooked up to the internet 21st century style. And the big reason for that today is that for the last 18 months or so, my wife and I have been working on building a new home, which Jundo would have brought a hammer or something as a prop, but I'm actually sitting in the prop. So this is it, that wall and that door and all that stuff out behind it. It's all a new structure. So it's been challenging. I think Jendo at some point told me he read that it's actually one of the, it's like, you know, it's like a death in the family or facing sickness or something in terms of like just a big stressor is buying a new home or building a new home or whatever. And it's a lot of change. And so, yeah, it was a little bit of stress. And I guess that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about is it has been stressful, and you know, we sit and we study the Buddha's words and we do these things, and stress still happens. We're householders, right? We're living out in the world. We have jobs and families and children and responsibilities, and so you know, it's tough sometimes. And yeah, so this was an example of tough, and it got me thinking. And I guess I thought I'm going to start with just a little story about this process for me of building a home and having to find a way to deal with the stress of doing that. We really wanted to build a home that was 3 generations. It's my wife and I and our son, but also my mother-in-law, who's come to live with us. She has some health issues and needs a little bit of help, and we wanted her close by where we could help out. And then my wife and I also are self-employed, and we need a space for our business. So it's a lot of stuff under this roof. It's a big roof. And we knew this was something we'd only do once. I don't think we'll do this again. Please, I hope we don't do it again. But that being the case, we also really wanted to try to do something that was socially conscious, environmentally conscious, was beautiful, kind of reflected our aesthetic and view of the world. So it's got solar panels on the roof, and it's very well insulated. And the term of art nowadays is it's not a high efficiency home. It's anyway, doesn't matter. So it should, you know, we should produce as much energy on site as we use in a year. We used a lot of local materials. There's hemlock from just over the border in West Virginia. All of the trees that we had to cut down to make room for the home, we found a sawmill, and they dried all the wood, and then they cut it into boards and stuff like that. And like the trim that you see on the wall behind me is actually from right here. The tree lived like right here. So there's a lot of things in the home that are like that. There's these big posts and beams upstairs, and they were from a bull pine tree that was here, and a bunch of the counters are oak, and they came from the oak trees. And anyway, so it was a long process, a lot of decisions, like literally a million decisions probably to make. And at some point, and I don't remember if somebody told me this, if I read it in a book, I don't know where it came from, but somebody said, you know, when you're trying to just get through all these decisions, and they said, you know, you should remind yourself to focus on the process. So instead of worrying too much about the final thing, think about the final thing. But you know, the actual outcome is probably kind of hazy. You don't really know what it's going to be like. And the idea of trying to make it perfect is sure to be painful. So let go of that and just focus on the process. So don't make a million decisions, make a decision, make another decision, make another decision, and just keep going. And of course, this is not Dharma, right? Like Jendo didn't need to chant to open the sutras, because focus on the process is not Dharma. But it was a pretty good coping mechanism for this project. And at some point, I found it so useful that I wrote it on a Post-it note, and I stuck it on my desk, where we would have all these phone calls with the designers, and you know, the checking in on the wood at the mill and things like that. And I sort of internalized this thing. And over time, it became trust the process. And instead, focus is part of it, but also trust it. And this felt more like Dharma to me, right? That don't worry about end results, because there are no ends. Nothing begins, nothing ends. It changes, it flows, it becomes one thing and another. We live in a house. We adapt to the needs of that house as our lives change. Once a year, we trim all of the trees. And we listen to the guys out there going, snick, snick, snick. And apparently once a month we change the candle. I just learned that today, is once a month Zendo changes the candle, right? Like the Zendo is not finished. It's a work in progress. It's a thing that's alive and moving and changing. And this is the way our lives work too, right? Like we live in these bodies just like we live in our homes, and these bodies adapt to needs as they arise. And ultimately they will decay too, just like our homes. So I don't know, after a while I started to think about everything as a process, right? It's not just building a house, it's everything we do as a process. And if we trust the process, the whole world just unfolds moment by moment by moment. And we don't forget what our goals are. It's good to have goals, but we don't think we're going to get there and get the thing and then be finished, right? Like we all know that won't happen, right? Like, so instead we just trust the process. It's going to unfold. No matter what we do, it's going to change and something new is going to arise. And anyway, so this trust the process, which came from focus on the process, I eventually got rid of my Post-it note and I wrote trust the process, and I stuck that on my desk. And still probably not Dharma, but I wondered about it, right? Like it feels kind of like something maybe the Buddha would have said. And I guess this is true across most forms of Buddhism, but certainly in the Mahayana, we have this idea of the 4 seals. And seals in the sense of like, you know, you would stamp a thing to say, this is true Dharma. This is the real enchilada. And they're kind of a litmus test to see if a teaching is in line with Buddhist teaching. Because in the Mahayana, we have lots of people, they're teaching, there's new teachings. The texts and the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism are alive. And Zendo expresses Dharma that probably at no point did the Buddha say that. But we can ask, well, is that in line with Buddhist teaching? And I'd like to say that, yes, I think that's usually true. So that's what these 4 seals are about. And they give us a way to look at a teaching and say, is this in line with sort of Buddhist teaching? So, you know, when somebody posts a Facebook meme and it sounds nice, like we could use these 4 seals to say, well, it does sound nice, but is that Buddhism? So anyway, so what are these 4 seals? These are kind of my wording of them. I looked at a couple of I looked at the Wikipedia and I read some articles and stuff like that. So, you know, take the way I worded these with a grain of salt, because everybody's going to word them a little differently because we're translating from Sanskrit and all that kind of thing. So the first seal: all phenomena or compound things or dharmas, I'm just going to say compound things, all compound things are empty without an inherent or self-existence. 2, all compound things are impermanent. 3, all emotions are dukkha. 4, nirvana is beyond extremes or concepts or even description, depending on, again, on which particular version you look at. So we'll start out with all phenomena are without inherent or self-existence. And I guess the easiest way to look at this is really anything we examine, anything we can touch, anything we can think, any dharma, is always going to be made of other things. So, you know, this bell, right? I call it a bell, but it's made from brass or copper, brass, and wood. Okay, cool. So we found it. There's wood, and then there's copper. But of course, the wood is made from fibers and water and sunlight, and you know, well, what's the fiber made from? Well, I don't know. A chemist or a biochem person could tell you, but you know, we could pick it apart and pick it apart and pick it apart and pick it apart. And so, you know, I think it's not too hard to see that we accept that everything that we look at is made up of other things. But I think the second part of it is that the important bit of this is that it doesn't have an inherent self-existence. And that says that there's not a thing that defines that bell as bell. Bell is what I call it. Outside of my window right now, I can see like a bunch of dead branches on an oak tree. And I call them dead branches. Throughout the day, there's a pileated woodpecker who comes and hangs out on it, pecks for holes to look for bugs, and is there often enough that I'm pretty sure that somewhere in that oak tree there's a nest, because pileated woodpeckers are cavity nesters. So that pileated woodpecker, I guarantee she calls it home. I call it dead tree. It's been dead for quite a while. There's probably termites in it, and they probably call it home or even food, right? And it's none of those things, although it is all of those things for a time. So I think that's the other part of this first seal, is that not only is there not, like, is every compound thing is made up of other things, but there isn't an inherent thingness to it. We bring a thingness to it. We call it a tree or a home or food. So, you know, with building this house, there were trees here. I called them trees, and they were alive, and I really liked them. And I was really sad when we had to cut them down. But they were made of all these other things. And we were lucky enough to have a mill nearby, and the time required to turn them into wood that we could use. You have to put them in a kiln and dry them, and then they get, you know, cut up and turned into boards, and those boards then have to dry again because they'll warp, and it's, you know, so we were lucky enough to have the time and people who were there who could do the work, and they went from being trees to being trim house. And that's pretty cool. So the second seal, all compound things are impermanent. So this sounds like the bad news, right? Like eventually the trim is still going to rot, whether we turned the tree into trim or not. It's going to disappear. It's going to fall apart, because all these compound things that came together eventually have to separate. And sometimes that makes us sad. And I think it was easy to get caught up when we were building this house in the thing that we were making. But really, like, from a perspective, look, building this was an exercise in suffering, or dukkha, because all we did for 18 months is take compound things and put them together to make a new compound thing. And so this second seal says, well, everything's going to fall apart. So we spent 18 months like making a thing that will fall apart, and that's okay, right? Like, I think that's part of what makes Buddhism, I think, something special and sane, is we don't throw up our hands and take a nihilistic stance and say, well, everything we do comes to nothing. Because that's what it looks like, right? Like all the things that we did, all this work we did, it's going to fall apart. It's going to come to nothing. But once you realize that everything is that way, you know, everything is that way. The dog poop on the sidewalk, and the Abrams tanks in front of the Lincoln Memorial, for those of you who are in the US, right? Like all the things that we like and don't like, all of it is going to come apart. All compound things come apart. And somehow that makes it, there's comfort in that. There's an equality that all things will come apart. And so we care for the things that we care for. We just know that they don't inherently exist. The bell doesn't inherently exist. It's parts, and they came together and they made something beautiful or ugly, whatever, that's up here. And eventually they will come apart. And so I think that this is something that you can kind of struggle with, because you come to Buddhism and you find this message that there's literally no solid ground to stand on. There's no essential thing. There's no substance to my life. And that sounds, I don't know, a little scary. I think a lot of us, we do want some kind of certainty. And the only certainty that I think is offered in Buddhism is that there's no bottom. We're all treading here. And that's okay. Which is, I don't know, sometimes can be a tough thing to accept. And I think that there's a lot of teachings that point at this, right? Like this is the Heart Sutra that we chant every week, right? That form is emptiness and emptiness is form. That's what it's getting at, is that there is no solidity, but it doesn't mean that things don't exist. The bell still exists. It just doesn't exist in the way that we conventionally think of it as existing in. It's stuff that came together and stuff that will fall apart. And so the way I've come to look at it, because of my silly Post-it note that says trust the process, is that everything is the process. The process is going on all the time. And it's not just the bell and the trees and the woodpecker and Zhendo's bushes being trimmed and putting a new candle in the Zendo. It's literally everything is like that. And I think maybe Dogen has a word that he uses sometimes in the Shobogenzo that I had a really hard time with for a while, which was uji. And I think it's translated as time being. And I had a hard time grasping it, like what he's even pointing at, because it sounds kind of, I don't know, woo-tastic, like there is time is being and being is time. And I still don't know that I understand it, but we're building here in the mountains, and we were down at the New River, which is a funny name because it's actually a really old river. The New River turns out to be a couple 100 million years old and maybe one of the oldest rivers on Earth. So the New River Gorge is something you've probably seen before, like on TV or on the internet or something, where people bungee jump off the tall bridge into this really deep gorge. So one of the things that the New River does is it's cut through these mountains. And so there's places where, and we were on the side of the New River, and you could see this one day, is that there's a mountain, and it's kind of, you can see the diagonal of the mountain, and you look down into the river, and there's lines in the river. And what it shows is that diagonal line used to be flat. It's like sedimentary rock. It was the bottom of an ocean long ago. And then the earth twisted, and it went up like this. And then this river came along and cut through it. And so for the time being, it's a mountain and a river. For the time being, it was the bottom of the ocean. For the time being, it was literally a mountain before the river came and cut through it. Like for the time being, it's all of those things. And It's changing and alive, and it's a process. So that comes back. So we trust the process. The process brings mountain and river and ocean and fish and bird and tree all to the same thing. It's pretty cool. Okay, so moving on. All emotions are dukkha. So we just went from like this very ontological thing about all compound things being impermanent to all emotions are dukkha. And I kept this as dukkha because a lot of times we see in the West, in English translations of Buddhist works, dukkha will get translated as suffering. And I've just never liked that. And maybe that's my thing that I got to sit with, but it's not quite suffering. It's not quite pain. And I read once, and I think this is probably not true because I only read it once, but I want it to be true really badly. And that is that dukkha in Sanskrit was actually an onomatopoeia. It was the sound of a wagon wheel out of true. So as the wagon went down the road, it kaduka, 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 kaduka. And I want that to be true. It probably isn't, but that describes it, right? Like that wheel being out of true is probably painful to your rear end if you're sitting in the cart. Okay, so it is pain. And you probably really wish that it wasn't out of shape. So maybe there's some suffering, but it's also just a feeling that there's a lack, that there's something missing, that things are not quite the way you want them to be. And I think we can see that in the way we interact with the things we really want. It's Friday night, right? Like a lot of us waited for Friday night because the work week is over, if you're lucky enough to have a 5-day work week. So wishing for Friday night on Thursday is dukkha. And then it's Friday night when the ZAZENKAI is over and you're like, yeah, I got the whole weekend in front of you. I guarantee you, you're going to think, man, on Monday, I'm going to have to do blah, 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 blah. And so wishing for Friday night is dukkha, and knowing that on Friday night that Monday is coming, that's dukkha too. And I think that, I don't know that that's a fair way to describe it in Buddhist terms, but I do think that it's like that there's a story, and I'm going to completely ruin it because I didn't actually look it up before this talk, but I remember there's a story where the Buddha goes to perhaps Nanda, not Ananda, but Nanda, and he shows him this heavenly realm with an empty throne, and Nanda's like, wow, that's like there's these beautiful, like men and women who are like watching over the realm, and there's a golden throne, and he's like, that's amazing. And he asks one of the attendants, like, whose throne is that? And they say, oh, it's for the monk Nanda. Right now, he doesn't know he's going to become a monk, but he's going to become a monk, and eventually he'll be reborn into this realm, and he will be king and rule over all things here. And Nanda's like, sweet. And he goes and he ordains with the Buddha, and he joins the Sangha. And later, the Buddha takes him to another realm, and it's this hell realm, and there's demons, and there's pools of blood and lava and the whole thing. And there's a throne there, and Nanda says, "Who's that throne for?" And one of the demons says, "Oh, it's for the monk Nanda." Eventually, he's going to fall out of this heavenly realm into the hell realm, and he's going to be here, and this will be his throne in this hell realm. And so I think that story to me like leads into the last thing, nirvana as beyond extremes, concepts, description. So awakening, nirvana, whatever we want to call it, when Nanda thought it was going to be heavenly and awesome, he was in for a disappointment, dukkha. And when he thought it was going to be awful, he was in for disappointment and dukkha. And so I think that when we sit, and Jundo has a lot of different ways of talking about this, that we sit with, you know, an open sky with things as they arise, just as they are. The really radical thing about doing that is that we're not pushing away the bad stuff that arises. Oh, this feels awful, my leg hurts, I wish it didn't. That's dukkha. And if we're sitting and everything is just right, and you feel incredibly peaceful, and you know there's just sort of a warm glow of the setting sun or whatever, imagine the beautiful thing that may have happened to you on the cushion, that's dukkha too, because it's going to end, it's going to turn into something else. Like, so dukkha is beyond, so nirvana is beyond these extremes of really wonderful and really awful. And so I say that like I know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. I've not tasted nirvana, right? I've not tasted awakening. Well, maybe a tiny bit, a couple grains of sugar, but that's it at best. And I think you have too. For anybody that's still sitting and doing this, you probably feel like there's some sanity to this. There's a rightness to it, but it isn't about the joy and it isn't about the sorrow. So how do we relate to that? Well, I think, you know, in Soto, everybody will say, well, just sit. Another way I think we could say it is don't push. Don't fret about outcomes. Trust the process. Not trust the process because one day you're going to get a house and one day you're going to get enlightened. That's not it. That's not quite it. Trust the process. Just it unfolds. It unfolds. You know, the Buddha woke up and he still sat. Why did he still sit? It's like this, you know, why would he do such a thing? He awakened to the way all things were, and then he went and sat again. So there must be something to the process. So trust the process. So trust the process. Is it a Buddhist teaching? No, I don't, probably not. But it was, for me, it literally became this thing that I kind of was like holding it up against Buddhist teachings and thinking about it. And then Jundo asked if I would do a talk, and I'd really been running this thing around in my head. So here you go. Here's my talk. It's actually it's a big fat question. Is trust the process in line with Buddhist teaching? I don't know, but it's probably as good as use the force or nanu nanu. If anybody remembers nanu nanu, I might be dating myself there. But okay. Well, and then so the last thing I wanted to do is read you a little poem by a guy that a bunch of us know really well, who built a house. I'm not going to read the title of it, so I want to see if you remember it. I've built a grass hut where there's nothing of value. After eating, I relax and enjoy a nap. When it was completed, fresh weeds appeared. Now it's been lived in, covered by weeds. The person in the hut lives here calmly, not stuck to inside, outside, or in between. Places worldly people live, he does not live. Realms worldly people love, he does not love. Though the hut is small, it includes the entire world. In 10 feet square, an old man illumines forms and their nature. A great vehicle bodhisattva trusts without doubt. The middling or lowly can't help wondering, will this hut perish or not? Perishable or not, the original master is present, not dwelling north or south, east or west. Firmly based on steadiness, it cannot be surpassed. A shining window below the green pines, jade palaces and vermilion towers can't compare with it. Just sitting with head covered, all things are at rest. Thus this mountain monk doesn't understand anything at all. Living here, he no longer works to get free. Who would proudly arrange seats, trying to entice guests? Turn around the light to shine within, then just return. The vast, inconceivable source can't be faced or turned away from. Meet the ancestral teachers, be familiar with their instructions, bind grasses to build a hut, and don't give up. Let go of hundreds of years and relax completely. Open your hands and walk innocent. Thousands of words, myriad interpretations, are only to free you from obstructions. If you want to know the undying person in the hut, don't separate from this skin bag, here and now. That's the Song of the Grass Roof Hermitage by Chiteau, which we read last year, the year before. So, 10 feet square. I don't think he could have fit a business and mother-in-law in, but, you know, I still agree with him. So that's it. That's my talk. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Okay, we'll take some questions. I just want to drop in one point. Don't think that even though we're householders, that Master Dogen didn't face this. There's a whole, it's about 2 years in his record of his activities and talks where everything just stops. And it's the period when he was building Eiheiji. And the reason is he was probably dealing with the mill and the wood and the carpenters and everything. There are no ceremonies. There's no record. He just obviously was working on that. And Eiheiji itself, you know, the buildings they have there now, they're not the original buildings. They've been replaced dozens of times over the centuries. Anyone have a question for our master builder here? You're building a house, Danny? Any question?
Well, I was kind of wondering. Well, thank you very much. That was very inspiring. So I was kind of wondering if you talk about the impermanence of things, if this kind of reminded you of not getting too attached to things. I mean, if you build a house and you pour all your wishes and feelings and emotions into it, and sense of beauty and responsibility for your environment and sustainability and things, and the idea that it could not work or collapse or be swept away or
It will be.
but I mean, not like in 300 years, but in your lifetime.
You want to mention you've been fixing a farmhouse in Switzerland for ages. France.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, when you said about the process, you know, the house that I'm building, I build it. I don't think about it being finished. I think about building it, so I can relate to the process. But you know, the idea of not getting too attached to it, to have this idea and say, okay, this is an idea, but it is as important as, you know, preparing my next meal or, you know, getting ready for the next ZAZENKAI. How do you feel about this? What are your comments on that?
Well, when you prepare your next meal, it's not going to last. You're going to be hungry tomorrow. Well, I can tell you like a couple of things that we did that were part of the, we're sort of paying homage to this idea. The exterior of the house is entirely clad in this hemlock, which actually came from fairly nearby. It came from over the border in West Virginia. But one of the reasons we chose hemlock is that A, it's fairly local, but B, you don't have to do anything to it. It's like cedar in that it's fairly rot resistant and pest resistant. And so we wanted something that would age beautifully. It's going to age, it's going to fall apart. So we wanted something that would do that beautifully, right? And I think, in Japanese, is that wabi-sabi? Is that the right term? Like when something is just naturally allowed to deteriorate. And so this hemlock, we did put we actually drove around the area and looked at there's a lot of old barns here that have hemlock siding. And some of them are 80, 90, 100 years old, and they still have color to them because like where they're shaded, there's still some orange and yellow, like their sort of original woody color. But where they've been completely exposed to the elements, they've turned sort of gray and blue. And so even in 100 years, like they haven't reached some final form. They're still changing. And we thought that was really cool. I will say my wife and mother-in-law were less crazy about having like a house that went from orange to blue, like than I was. So we kind of met in the middle, and we did put a little bit of oil on them that had some tinting to it, so that it's a little closer to that gray than it would have been naturally. But so here's this thing that we did, like to just say, well, you know what, it's gonna age and fall apart and either need to be repaired or replaced. Some kind of upkeep is gonna need to be done because it changes, and it's this always in the process of breaking into its constituent elements. And then the other thing I can say is just another little story is one of the things that I was the most excited about with using the oak tree. There was only one oak tree, the rest were pine. And so the people at the mill did such an amazing job of like using every little tiny piece. But one of the big things we wanted to do with that oak is turn it into one of the countertops in the kitchen. So instead of having stone or masonite or whatever, it's literally just this huge chunk of oak that it's not treated with anything other than a little bit of oil so that it stays moist. And so it's almost like one big cutting block, like if you have a chopping block. So it was this big plan is we're going to let that oak just be a huge slab of oak, and we're going to cut our vegetables right on it. And it was going to be 2 inches thick. So 2 inches, really big and thick. And I was excited about it. So just before they got ready to do the final planing of it to turn it in nice and smooth, they discovered that there were borer beetles living inside of the wood, and they had survived the first trip through the kiln, and they just had stayed dormant in there, and now they were slowly like making their way out, which wouldn't be a problem except that then they leave little holes in it, and if you're prepared, when you wash it or whatever, water gets down in it, and it could harbor bacteria and be bad for food handling. So we had to have them plane it down to thinner and put it back in the kiln. And the kiln thing is not like, I pictured it as this like huge oven, and it's not. It's just kind of a place that keeps it really warm. And so the bugs actually can leave. So, we weren't we weren't violating the precept not to take life, because the bugs had an opportunity to leave if they wanted. But so even here, we are, we're planning for this beautiful thing. It's going to be brand spanking new, this countertop. Like there's literally bugs eating their way out of it. And I don't know, something about that was like a really important teaching, that like this whole thing is still changing. And so I don't know, that was part of this thinking about it as a process as opposed to a thing. I don't know, is that helpful at all?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All our householders?
Really took householder to the next level, right? Like.
Questions? Yakshi, you still a renter?
Yes. Someday.
Okay, I'll ask a question, and it's kind of the term can be serious because there are actual homeless people in this world, and we all wish they had beautiful, safe, warm houses for themselves. But how do you see the two words coming together? Homeless, like homeless kodo, or Nishijima Roshi's teacher, who he was free and wandered everywhere, so he was homeless. And you're a householder, so you're fixed to a place. How do these two terms come together for you?
I guess it's a matter of, okay, well, two answers. The straight, like, boring answer is that I'm a little uncomfortable with it. I mean, I'll be completely honest. I'm a little uncomfortable with it. It's huge. It's beautiful. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little guilty about this thing that we've done. I'm also really grateful for the work that I'm able to do, that my wife is able to do, the fact that my mother-in-law had saved up all this money. I mean, she's not just living with us, she helped pay for this whole process and all that. So I'm sometimes a little uncomfortable with where I am with that. Now, I think the other answer I think, so that's maybe the relative answer. I think the other answer is that ultimately we're all homeless in the sense that there's no solid ground to stand on. Everything is shifting and in motion, and let go of it now or let go of it later, because eventually you're going to have to let go of it. And so I think that comes back to this Buddhist concept of grasping or attachment, that it wasn't, the Buddhist teaching, I think, on attachment is not just like, oh, I love my dog or my wife or my kid or my house or my whatever it is that I love. But it's the grasping, it's the holding on to it, not wanting it to change. That said, I'm not homeless. I'm not Kodo Sawaki or, so many monks and nuns that have come before and are alive right now in the world, literally homeless. I am not like them.
All right, before we go, now's your chance. He also has lots of home improvement tips, varnishing. He's seems like an expert at this point. Going one up, yes, Shingen. Wait a second. Shingen was first.
All right. Thank you, Sekishi. That was a great talk, and I know what you mean because we did renovations on here a couple of years ago. And the only thing that comes to mind is we may understand emptiness as emptiness, but we understand that drywall dust is never empty. It will be with you forever. And congrats on your new homeless home.
Thank you. Actually, I have a little story about drywall dust, and it has to. I don't know. This might help answer. It might go back to Daniela's question as well. Shortly after we moved in, I mean, within like a week, it seemed like the HVAC system just did not work. When it was hot outside, it didn't make it cool. When it was cold outside, it didn't make it warm. And so we were like, uh-oh, something didn't work right. And we had somebody come out, and it never occurred to me, despite home ownership for many years, like to go check the filters, because we just moved in. It's a brand new house. Well, no, the HVAC system had been running for months while they sanded drywall, made cabinets, like did all that stuff. And when I opened up the thing to pull out the filters, they were disgusting. So the house was old and needed maintenance before it was even finished. Grass had already grown.
Kyonin, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Sekishi. Wonderful, wonderful talk. And I really like how you put it very clear that it is the process of life, not actually the final goal of what we're going towards in our personal struggles. But you said that building your house is not dharma. I think you're saying that it's not like coming from the Buddha or Dogen, but being aware, being present, being mindful of everything that's going on in one time in your life, and being aware of the lessons, and being able to translate them into English so we can understand. That's Dharma in my book, my friend. So never say that. I think you've had a great experience, and I'm grateful that you can share that with us. And I will also be grateful if I can spend maybe a couple of months in vacation at your new home.
All of us together.
Great.
He's got the room now.
Yes. And the internet. So even if you can't come, you can join in.
All right. On that note, I guess I'll recite the verse to close the sutras, because this was definitely the Dharma. All right. Oh, and the dog has joined us. May the merits of these teachings penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we and every sentient being together may realize the Buddha's way. All Buddhas throughout space and time. All Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, Prajna, Paramita. Okay, just like the size of a house does not make it a home, that's a matter of the heart. The length of Zazen, long or short, does not make the Dharma. So we will have a very short sitting right now, maybe as short as this bell will ring. Okay. It's hokey pokey time. By the way, if you can hear outside, the Japanese gardeners are not all about the snip, snip, snip of little scissors. They broke it out to chainsaws now. You see, there's a time to snip, 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 and there's a time to just. All right, we have a special treat for our hokey pokey today. The full name is the Virginia Technical Institute, is it not?
The Virginia Polytechnical Institute and State something, University.
All right. Well, this
Virginia
is
Tech. Go Hokie.
Well, Sekishi is coming from Virginia, and he is a graduate of the Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. And so we are very fortunate that I have located the hokey pokey by the Virginia Tech Marching Band halftime show for the football game. So we're going to enjoy this. By the way, you may notice one of the guys, I think everyone who's kind of big and bearish and has a beard looks just like Sekishi. Every character I see on Game of Thrones, I think just looks like him. So There, one guy here with the tuba looks at. Are you ready, everybody? All right. On a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3.
Hokey pokey.
Go Virginia Tech. Yes, sir. All right. Accompanied by the sound of chainsaws. Zazen. will have a long kinhin. Okay, by the way, during the long kinhin, get some tea. Outside on a significant day, night where you are. Okay, for a few minutes. Some yoga. I took a couple of yoga classes this week. Ms. W, a regular member. Boy, she's something. She put me to shape. She's very flexible. I am not. will now recite the metaverses, followed by a little bit more Zazen. Okay. Think of someone you love, friend. The difficult person is easy, I know, sometimes. A stranger, yes. Who else am I missing? Yourself, don't forget yourself. And the Virginia Polytechnic Marching Band, let's chant for them as well. Okay. All right. Take a minute to stretch. You guys understand? Yeah. Okay. Oh, I left my bell over here. This robe's a little long at the bottom. The under robe here is a little long for a bottom. I have to make sure not to step on the edge. You with the kimono, you understand. You understand what we go through, right? It's terrible. Yeah. Some Zen Buddhist forum online, I saw that someone posted a picture of the women in the Islamic country wearing jalaba, with the black and everything. How can they dress like that? That's like the 13th century, which I promptly posted a picture of a Zen monk with the hat and the robes. Okay. All right then. First we chant for ourselves, but it's in all a circle that goes around. We could really start anywhere. Then someone we love, which can be a human being, a dog, a kitty cat, anyone at all is fine. Someone asked me that, can I chant for my dog? Yes, you may chant for your dog. A friend, someone we barely know, someone passing in the street we barely notice. Then the difficult person. We chant with the idea that if they knew peace, if they had health inside, they would not do what they do or did or will do. And then we chant for all sentient beings everywhere. Okay, we begin with ourselves. May I be free of suffering. Go with the process. May I feel safe. Really feel it. This is visualization. And still. Maybe picture just in your heart. You don't have to literally picture it, but some place where you felt really safe, still, and secure. We all have such a place. Somewhere. May I be free of enmity. That means hate. May I be loving, grateful, and kind. We don't do a lot of Tibetan practices, but there's a reason to the madness sometimes. They picture, for example, they have to picture loving, grateful, and kind. So they imagine, let's say, a Buddha who has the ideal image of the love, the gratitude, and the kindness, and they picture it literally hovering over their head and it's flowing in. I'm not saying you need to do that, but if you want to, that's what it is, the loving, the gratitude, the kindness. If you got to borrow it from that image, that's fine. May I be healthy. And, because we all get sick sometimes, at ease in all my ills. May I be at peace, embracing all conditions, all conditions of life. Okay, now for someone we love. By the way, I love that they're standing back there. I sometimes I drag this out even longer just to see how long I can keep them standing back. Okay, someone we love. May he be free of suffering. May he feel safe and still. May he be free of enmity. May he be loving, grateful, and kind. You know, if you wanted to, you want to go to a little Tibetan, you feel that Tibetan loving gratitude like flowing over there. Okay. I'm getting a little esoteric today, huh? May he be healthy and at ease in all his ills. May he be at peace, embracing all conditions of life. Now for a friend. May she be free of suffering. May she feel safe and still. I'm chanting for the gardeners. I should say they. Okay. May they be free of enmity. May they be loving, grateful, and kind. May they be healthy. Last year they came, one of them got stung by a wasp this big. That's a dangerous profession out there. Not a wasp, what do you call it? A horse bee. Got these things. May they be healthy and at ease in all their ills. May they be at peace, embracing all conditions of life. That's where it makes a difference in their cutting, you know, if they have a peaceful heart when they're cutting, you could hear it. If they were angry, you know. When I do the weeds and things, I can feel it, you know. Take my time. Okay, what's next? The stranger, right? Who should it be? May she be free of suffering. May she feel safe and still. May she be free of enmity. May she be loving, grateful, and kind. May she be healthy and at ease in all our ills. May she be at peace, embracing all conditions of life. Now for the difficult person who does harm, who themselves are filled with anger and pain, like they have a bad tooth and they have to take it out on other people. We wish that their tooth did not hurt so much, or their soul. We don't, you know, Buddhists, we don't talk about soul, but their spirit, so that they wouldn't do this to other people. That's how we wish them peace. Okay? May he be free of suffering. May he feel safe and still. May he be free of enmity. May he be loving, grateful, and kind to others, to himself too. May he be healthy and at ease in all his ills. Sometimes when someone's done bad to us, we have to be bigger than the situation, bigger than them. May he be at peace, embracing all conditions of life. And now for all sentient beings, including the what was it? The weevils in Sekishi's, what was it? Pine tree. We'll chant for them too. May we be free of suffering. May we feel safe and still. May we be free of enmity. May we be loving, grateful, and kind. May we be healthy and at ease in all our ills. May we be at peace, embracing all conditions of life. I just want to compliment these two, all of you at home too, but boy, your form is so nice in the way you stand, and also both of you, the way you were sitting Zazen, your beautiful form. Form is very important in this practice. It's a practice of the body too, and a nice form of the body, balanced, makes for a balance of heart and mind, so very nice, very nice. All right, let's put that to practice a little bit, and we can sit for a few more minutes, okay? Ready? You can sit where you are, or Sekishi can go outside and sit with the bears. You have bears around there? No bears, okay. You guys are going to sit? Okay, please have a seat. Now I get to watch all of you here too. So nice form. Let me see some nice form there. Okay, I'm looking. All right. We will now recite the verse of atonement and the four vows.
All harmful words, thoughts, and acts ever committed by me since of old, on account of beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and mind, now I atone for them all. To save all sentient beings, though beings numberless, to transform all delusions, though delusions inexhaustible, to perceive reality, though reality is boundless, to attain the enlightened way, a way unattainable, to save all sentient beings, though beings numberless, to transform all delusions, though delusions inexhaustible, to perceive reality, though reality is boundless, to attain the enlightened way, a way unattainable, to save all sentient beings, though beings numberless, to transform all delusions, though delusions inexhaustible, to perceive reality, though reality is boundless, to attain the enlightened way, a way non-attainable.
Well, thank you all. And especially I'd like to thank the Right Reverend Novitiate and Polytechnic Sekishi. Please be sure to get your talk up on the Treeleaf podcast, by the way. And I called him Master Carpenter and Gardener, but he is, he and also our old member Samio and Shingen and Kyonin too is the fellows who keep the roof on our place electronically at Treeleaf in 100 ways a month you don't know. Oh boy. So thank you again for all of that. And peace to all of you, and may you build something in life yourself. See you guys later. See you, Doyu and Jonin, Onkai. Brad, thanks for making it. Bye-bye. See all you guys at home too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.